and welcome to Gen Friends. I'm your host, Cheri Passey from Carolina Girl Genealogy. And again, we are coming to you with a wonderful panel and a special guest. We've got Shelley Murphy, our family tree girl. Hi, Shelley.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good to have you here. Melissa Barker is here, our archive lady. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, great to be here.
It's so nice to have you. I always love the archives. Look behind you, wishing I can get to an archives. Right? We've got Laura Hedgecock,
Hi.
our treasure chest of memories, our story girl.
Hi, everyone.
We have Dan Earl. Hey, Dan, family history guy. And Mary Kircher Roddy from MKR Genealogy. Hi, Mary.
Hi there.
With her beautiful quilt behind her. Now, our special guest is staying up late for all of us today. It's John Boeren coming to us all the way from the Netherlands. Hi, John.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know for our European friends, you know, it's hard, but we love to have you on. So welcome. And the first thing, just to get us started, unless somebody else has a question they want to, you know, they're dying to be the first one to ask. I just want to know how you got started in genealogy, so we can just understand a little bit more about you, and then we'll ask you about some questions about doing genealogy in the Netherlands. So how'd you get started with all this crazy addicting stuff?
Yeah, well, I think we have to go back in time a little bit, because I was like 14 years old when I was at a birthday party of my grandfather's youngest brother.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me that he had a call earlier that week from a man who had the same surname as we do, and he wanted to know if we were related somehow. And my great uncle had no idea who this man was. He had no idea if we were related. But what he did was he made a little sketch on a paper with some names and lines. So what he was doing, he was just drawing a very first beginning of a family tree. And when I saw that, I was just fascinated by the idea that I saw names, because those were the names of my grandfather's uncles and aunts, and I had no idea who those people were. So that fascinated me a lot. And I was already interested in history for a long time then. So I would be reading books about history and also about royal families in Europe, because of course they're all connected and it's all about those families in history books always. So I saw all these family trees from the royal families in Europe, and then I saw, well, let's say the very beginning of our own family tree, and I was like, maybe I can have a family tree like the ones I always see in those history books. And that's how it more or less started. And then in the same year, probably not a coincidence, because things have always a reason. There was a TV series about how to do genealogy. So I watched a couple of those episodes, and then later that year, I think it was in October, I went for the first time to the local archives. And I just turned 15 by then, and I was knocking on the door, and the people in the reading room were like, "What's that boy doing here?" So when I look back now at these first times in an archive, I think that they had no idea if I was serious about doing genealogy. So I remember the first time I was in the reading room, gave me a place somewhere in a corner and gave me some copies of birth, marriage, and death registers. And they were like, "Okay, here you have some books, do your thing."
Wow.
But nevertheless, I found it very interesting. And that's how it all started in 1988. And now we're more than 30 years later. And it's become my passion, and it's become my profession.
Wow. That's amazing. 14. Wow, that's great. I love that. And I love that, you know, for most of us, that's how it happens. It's some kind of family story, some kind of something like that, something interesting that we find out happens with our story, and that's how we all get started. Well, let's start with some questions. Who's got some questions for John? Go ahead, Shelley.
I've got one. Yeah, and did you hear stories within your family? Was there oral history that also intrigued you as well that got you going?
Yeah, there was especially one about my mother's family, because my mother's family, especially the male members in her family, they have a special, I don't know, special look on their faces, like they were, let's say, Eastern European,
Oh, okay.
Slavic, maybe, if
Uh-huh.
you would say. So there was a family story going on that somewhere in history, one of the ladies would have had a relationship with some kind of soldier who came from Russia or something like that.
Mhm.
So that intrigued me a lot. And when I started to look into that part of the family, I did discover that it was half true.
Oh.
So there was a, well, we go back in time to the 1820s,
Mhm.
and there was a Protestant girl who served as a maid in a big city. And while she was in the big city serving with a rich family, she met a Catholic soldier boy. Well, you can imagine that in the 1820s,
Boston Catholic.
Yeah.
exactly, that was not a wise decision to
No.
start something with a Catholic soldier. Um, but they did. She got pregnant, and then she had even a bigger problem because her Protestant family said, you're not coming back to us now. You have a child from
Oh.
that Catholic.
Catholic. Oh.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Huh.
So she had her son while she was still in the city, unmarried, because unfortunately the soldier died a couple of months later.
Oh,
Mm.
no.
Yeah, he became sick. He went to hospital, the military hospital, and he died. And she was all alone. She could not go back to her parents because they did not accept her anymore.
Mm.
And she was there with her baby, and she had no idea where to go. And I always wondered why she decided to go from that city to a very small village, which, well, it's nowadays close to my own hometown,
Mhm.
but it was a very small village that probably nobody in her area would ever have heard of. So I always wondered, why would she go from her place to this little village? And what I also found very intriguing was that I saw in what you would call census records, and we call
Mhm.
population registers, and we can talk about it later if you want, that her son did not grow up with her. He grew up with a family, and in my eyes, that family were complete strangers. And I had no idea why the son would not be with his mother, but with complete strangers. And then one day I found out through the son's baptism records that, well, I found the name of this Catholic soldier, and it turned out that she had gone to his parents. So let's say her parents-in-law, who obviously were
Oh.
not her
Wonderful.
parents-in-law,
Gotcha. Okay.
but he was from this small village, and that gives me the impression that there was more between them than
Mhm.
just a one-night stand
Stand,
that
yeah.
made her
Exactly.
pregnant, because otherwise she would never have
No.
known where to
Who they
go and who his
Right.
parents were. So
Right.
she traveled, I think, for 3 days, partially
Mm.
on foot or by cart. I have no idea how she did it by then, to his parents. And so they took their grandson into their home
Hmm.
and raised their grandson. And she started a new life, and she found a man in this village as well. And they lived happily ever after.
That's
Oh, good.
yeah.
Wow. What a
That's
story.
interesting. I like that. What I'd like to bring out just before I turn the time over to Laura, because I know she's got a question, but that just goes to prove that all these family stories, we need to
Yeah.
really research them, because a lot of time there is a little bit of truth into them. Even
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
most far-fetched story, it started somewhere. and started getting passed down. So always research those family stories. That was fascinating. That was really a good story. I'm glad that you decided to research that one and share it with us. Laura,
Yeah.
Laura, you had a question?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. Yeah, but my question is, John, I know you're an expert in the genealogy in the Netherlands. What percentage of your ancestry originates in the Netherlands themselves?
It's funny that you ask about this because I spoke this week about how wonderful it is to work with Dutch records and how wonderful it is to have Dutch ancestors. And then I looked into my 252 ancestors in the 7 generations before me, and out of those 252, only 5 were not born in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
But those 5 were born in Belgium, so that's just on the other side of the border.
Oh, wow.
So I think that's the answer to your question. Almost everybody in my family is from the Netherlands. And to make it even more interesting, I think that, well, let's say 75% of my ancestors come from an area which is only half of our province. They are all from the same area, and we're talking about, well, let's say an area of 50 kilometers. So it's a very small area, especially for your ideas, where in the United States people would travel from one state to another.
Yeah.
Mine did not leave the province, and they stayed in this area of what is it, 30 miles?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, and especially considering how ancient by American
Right.
Yes.
these are, because I know when we were there in 2015, I think I took my son to the little courthouse in Linden, which is a little town, and showed him where his ancestors registered their marriage before they came to the U.S. Now I think it was super old. I think that was in the 1400s. And
Oh,
the
wow.
courthouse is still there.
Yeah.
Or at least it may have been added on, it might not look exactly like it did, but it's really interesting because there's nothing here that's that old that you can go back and trace and see where your ancestors walked.
Just to add a little bit to that, because of my DNA test, I also wanted to know my female line, of course, my female line of ancestors. And I have found 12 generations in a row, and they all lived in the same town.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Are you finding any endogamy then? Is there endogamy going on in your?
To be.
Yeah, there is. My grandparents my maternal grandparents, they were related at least in 5 different ways.
That gets that tree all confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I even found out that my father, who is from the city, and my mother is from the countryside, if you can say it like that, even they are related somehow. So yeah.
Sounds like the South.
Sounds like, yeah, it does.
In the end, I'm still healthy.
Exactly. That's right. Well, Melissa says that she's got a story that she wants to share with us.
I do have a story, but I also have to show my ignorance. I am not very good at geography. So Scandinavian, does any of your research include Scandinavia?
Well,
no,
it doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
The thing is that
you can still tell your story.
Yeah, of course you can.
I'll tell you the story. Where I live in a town called Tennessee Ridge, Tennessee. And because I'm an archivist here for our county, and so around 1900, maybe late 1800s, 1900, this little town actually was populated by Scandinavians. And what has happened, the story is that there were land speculators here called the Middle States Land Company. They were selling the land here, and so they put out advertisements in Scandinavian newspapers. And supposedly there was a picture printed of men standing in fields of wheat to show the richness of the land. In actuality, they were kneeling in sagebrush.
I was going to say, where are they going to get fields of wheat?
Right, exactly. So I'm on the hunt for an article with that photograph. We've always been looking for that photograph. But anyway, they came here and they started canning factories in Tennessee Ridge. They planted fruit trees. And so the Scandinavians, names like Stevenson, Schmidt, and names like that from Scandinavia. So I'm horrible at geography. So I know, you were talking about the Netherlands and I thought, wait a minute, I don't think that's Scandinavia. So
It's all
I
good.
thought, well, maybe I should not tell my story.
No, that's a great story.
Yeah.
That's a great
Well,
story.
Minnesota did that with the Swedish, right?
Yep.
Weren't they settled by folks from Sweden? Heavily settled.
Yep.
Same type thing like that area of Tennessee she's talking about.
So
Yeah.
did the same thing happen with the Netherlands? Did they come over and advertise? And is there a population somewhere in the United States of mostly people from the Netherlands?
Michigan.
In Michigan and in
Michigan, Dutch.
Michigan and Wisconsin are the two states where the biggest
Yeah,
Dutch
Grand
communities are.
Rapids is where I grew up. All the bands in the world are in Grand Rapids.
Exactly, Grand Rapids.
So
And you even have places like Holland over there.
Holland,
Yep.
Michigan,
That's
a
right.
little
Yep.
town.
Yep.
Shelley, when my son went to Hope College and they
Yeah.
asked how he could bring diversity, he said, my hair is dark
Right,
and
right.
my name does not begin with Van.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
That is hysterical. That is so funny. John,
so
you mentioned the census record was called something different. And what are the main records that people use when they're researching in the Netherlands?
Well, it depends, of course, the time period that you're looking for. But let's say
Sure.
you're looking for records from the 19th century, because we had several waves of immigration in the Netherlands. We had, of course, the early settlers who would go to what later became the United States in the 1600s, so the 1630s, 1640s, New Netherlands. New Amsterdam, later New York, of course. That was one wave of immigration. And then we had a second one in let's say the second half of the 19th century. Those were the people in mostly the northern provinces of the Netherlands who were all into agriculture and things were not going right. They were looking for a better life and they would leave the Netherlands and go to Michigan and Wisconsin. That's the time where most people from the Netherlands would end up.
What years were that?
I think it started in the 1840s. Yeah, the 1840s, and then it went on till the late 1800s.
And I think that the 1862 Homestead Act, the land. And you're thinking he talking about them coming over in the 1840s, and then think of the opportunity of being able to obtain the land. And because my folks come out of that, on a couple of the lines, and they all had land, homestead. So it's very interesting.
There were two reasons in the late 19th century why people would leave the Netherlands. One reason was, of course, just that they had poor life in the Netherlands and they wanted prosperity, and they would go to, well, the place where everything was good and big and nice. But also a large group left the Netherlands because of their religion. We had the Dutch Reformed religion in the Netherlands was the mainstream, and we had some smaller streams who were, well, they were tolerated, but they did not have the same rights as the majority, and therefore they thought that they had to go to a place where they would have more religious freedom. So they also moved for that reason to the United States. So I don't know, we started to talk about this, but I don't know what was the original question.
Just the different types of records, that.
Oh yeah, exactly.
What is it? What is the challenge?
He mentioned the census, and then he said we call it census, and then you called it population, which ours is actually one of the census is a population census.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know the differences in some, you know, of the records.
Yes, so to answer Cheri's question, let's say that you have those ancestors from the Netherlands who came in the 19th century, then of course we have civil registration.
Okay.
And civil registration in the Netherlands started in 1811, when we were still part of the French Empire. Civil registration was introduced, and we have an ongoing registration for births, marriages, and deaths since 1811 until today.
Oh wow!
And because all the records were made always in 2 copies. One was stored at the municipal level in town hall, and one would always go to the courthouse. So that means that if town hall ever burned down, there was always a second copy. So there are not many places in the Netherlands where you find record loss.
Wow.
Which is wonderful, of course. Yes.
Right.
So civil registration is, of course, the place where you look for your ancestors in the 19th and early 20th century. Because later in the 20th century, these records are not public anymore. So we have restrictions for 100 years for births, 75 years for marriages, and 50 years for deaths. So that means that if you're looking for your, let's say, grandfather was born in 1930, you have a problem because his birth record is not public yet. But in the 19th century, we're talking about those immigrants who came to the United States, to Michigan or Wisconsin in the 19th century. You can find those in civil registration. That's one thing. And then the other thing that you really need to use when you're looking for your family in the 19th century is what we call population registers. Now, the biggest difference between a census as you have and the population registers that we have is that your census was taken every 10 years, and it's like a snapshot. Right. Who lived where at that specific moment. Whereas our population registers, and those started in 1850, they are an ongoing registration. So it's not a snapshot, but it's like a movie. You can see what happened in a family during 10 years or 20 years or even 30 years, as long as that register was used. So I can show you a page from a population register and maybe point out some things that are interesting if you're working with them.
Sure.
So John, is this like the census and that someone came and took it every year, or is it more like the German current system where you register every time you move somewhere?
Exactly, like that.
Okay.
Yes.
So in Germany, when you live in a city, you have to register that you're moving there. If you move away, you have to register that you're moving.
Exactly.
So everybody knows where you are at all points.
That's exactly what happened here as well. And that also means that you can follow people from place to place and even from country. And therefore, these population registers are also very helpful for those people who are looking for immigrant ancestors, because one of the things they always want to know is, when did we leave the Netherlands? And then, of course, you have passenger lists and all those kind of records that you have from Ellis Island, for example. So you know when people arrived in the United States. But the question, when did they leave the Netherlands? Was that around the same time or not? That's difficult if you're looking from the American perspective. So the question is always, do you have records that say when they left the Netherlands? And we don't have passenger lists that say something about when they left, because those passenger lists were made or kept in the United States, and there are no copies or something like that here in the Netherlands. But what we do have is that registration in the population registers, where it would say Mr. X or Lady Y is leaving Amsterdam or Tilburg or Eindhoven or Rotterdam because he or she wants to move to Michigan. And then there is a date when they were supposed to leave. It's not always completely accurate because things always might happen in between. But that's the moment when they said to a register at town hall, like we are leaving and we are moving to Michigan or whatever other place.
New York too, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
well, sure, if you want to set, you can share your screen. If you want to show us, that'd be fabulous. I'd love that.
I'm gonna try to show you my great grandfather, who is right behind me. Let's see if I can share my screen. Would this work?
It should.
Oh, there.
Oh, yes.
So what you see here is just an open book with 2 pages, one on the left and one on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
And if I zoom in a little, as far as I can,
you see him up there in Joseph.
You see here my great-grandfather's father and mother. So on line 1 is my great-great-grandfather. So his name is Josephus Carolus, let's say Joseph Charles, if you would translate his name. By the way, my family name translates to farmers, if you wanted to say it in English. So he's the head of the family. He was born on the 6th of January, 1861, in a town close to Tilburg, but just on the border with Belgium. Then you see, in this column, you see his religion. He was Catholic. You see his occupation. He worked in textile factory. You see an address. And you see that besides him, you have his wife, and you have a whole list of children.
Oh,
goodness.
Now, I have to check. This is for the period 1900-1910. So this register was used for 10 years. And what they did, so it started in 1900. So what they did was those people who lived there already until 1900 are recorded, but also people who came later by birth or whatever reason here as well, 1902, 1905. Now you also see that there is a line going through the oldest daughter, and that means that she left the family for a reason. Sometimes that's because they die, and sometimes it's because they go and work for another family as a servant, or they start their own family and they move to a different house. So they start their own household together with a husband or something like that. So in this case, you see there is a line through her, and you see here in this column, it says that she moved to a different house. Now there are no dates here. Maybe if I look for something else. I'm just scrolling. This is a very interesting one. You see a lot of lines here. So what happens, you see here in this column, column 16, you see a date when they left the town, and you see also the new place where they moved to. And you see in all those columns, you see dates and places, so you can follow every child, every member of the family, from this place to another one. But you also see here in column 18 a date mentioned, and that's when this person died. So Mr. Zwagemakers from 1843, I think it is, he died in 1905. So you see columns with dates and places when people came into the family, and you have dates and places when they left the family. So if you follow them from register to register, from place to place, you can really create a whole timeline where they lived, in what city or in what village, what happened to them, when they came back again. And that's wonderful. So this is an ongoing registration, this register for 10 years, but some registers were used for 30 years. So you see what happened for 30 years in one family.
We're all jealous.
I'm so jealous. I mean, but it's what's amazing is them going back. And so coming up, I mean, following what Laura said, so every time they moved, they had to register.
Yes. I can give you here, for example, you still see the page, I guess, right?
Yes.
So here we have a son, like we call him Francis, and he's born in 1884. Now you see there is a line through his name because he left in 1903. If we look further on the page, voila, there is Francis again, 1884. What happened? He came back to the family in 1904. But in 1905, he left again.
He leaves again.
And let's see, there is Francis again, 1884, because he came back in 1905 again.
Wow.
So,
boy, he's like a boomerang child.
Was he going away to school or something?
No, he was a wheelwright, and he would just go to
work. To
work somewhere.
Okay.
He was probably an apprentice going to someone and work for that person. And often they would also live with the family where they worked.
Oh, okay.
Melissa has a question.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. You may have, and I said it wasn't geography related. You may have already answered it, but, you know, for us in the United States, when we're trying to jump the pond, as we say, to get over to Europe or wherever country we're going, we find difficulties, we find roadblocks, and we have to know specific things like the specific town or things that are challenges. So from or across the pond to get over to the United States, what challenges do you face? Do researchers face?
One of the things that are very difficult for us is that married women take on the name of their husband. They don't do that in the Netherlands.
I noticed that one register you showed the wife, and it was, is that her maiden name? Yeah.
Yes. A maiden name in official documents, you will always find their maiden names. So the whole thing, like Mr. and Mrs. X, that doesn't happen in the Netherlands, which makes
I'm jealous about that too.
I am too.
Yeah, because
so if you're tracing someone in the United States, then if it's a female and they married, let's say, as soon as they got there, then it would be very difficult to find her if she took her husband's name.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like if you have a Smith family or a Jones family or whatever a common name, in the Netherlands you would always have her maiden name. So it would be easier to distinguish between John Johnson 1 and John Johnson 2, who might even have a woman with the same first name. But in the Netherlands you would have her maiden name and you would always be able to distinguish the two families. In the United States, she would be Mr. John John, Mrs. John John. You have no idea. Maybe you don't even find her first name.
Right.
And I found that very complicated. I did work for a client in the last months for a Dutch family who moved to New Jersey. And then I have a couple, and both the man and the woman have the same first name. There are two couples with the same first name for him and her. And I have no idea, all those children that were born, were they from couple 1 or from couple 2? Because I cannot place them in the right family.
Yeah.
Something like that would never happen in the Netherlands. Well, I don't think it would often happen in the Netherlands because women just always keep their own maiden name in official documents, that is. I mean, if you ask my mother, what's your name? She will use my father's last name. If she picks up the phone, she says, hello, I'm Mrs. Boeren. But if she gets her passport or another official document from the tax registration or whatever, it will always mention her maiden name. So one of the things that's very difficult for us to work with.
Sure.
I can see that.
Mary's got a question.
So it sounds so easy, John. What do you do with your time? I mean, seriously, you just find stuff like.
Yeah, well, you know, I always say if you are lucky, you only need 3 Sunday afternoons and you're back to 1700. Yes. But
Did we convert?
Years.
Did we?
To 1800.
Wow.
The thing is that we always say in the Netherlands, this is only the backbone, and it's all about the flesh. So focus on all those other sources that you can find that give you a better understanding of how people lived, what they did, where they lived, And because the names, the dates, and how they were related, it's quite easy to get that from our records. But if you want to know more about them, then you really have to go. You don't stay at home looking at your screen. You have to go, and Melissa will be happy to hear this. You go to an
That was going to be my
archive.
next question.
You go to an archive and you start looking at all those other types of records that are available.
Now, the archives there, are they each in little where are the records? I mean, I know archives, but are they in government facilities, little archives? Like here, we have county archives. How are they there?
Yes, we have 3 levels. We have the National Archives in The Hague. We have provincial archives, which nowadays are not called like that, but they still focus on everything on a provincial level. And we have municipal level. So we have local archives as well. Nowadays, you see that a lot of municipalities will work together and hire one archive for the job. So, for example, here in my hometown, we have the local archives, but they work for 12 municipalities. So all the archives from those 12 places are located here in the local archives. So you have 3 levels, but that's only for government records.
That was my going to ask you, do these places only have government records, or are they like archives in the United States, and I guess in Europe too, where they accept what I would call historical and genealogical records, things that are donated by individuals, scrapbooks, diaries, letters, things like that?
What you see in local archives and in provincial archives and in the national archives is that they want to have a collection that gives a proper view of society. So it's one part is government related and another part is, let's say, society related. So for example, my local archives have collections from sports clubs. They have collections from companies, just
That's
businesses, private businesses. For example, in my hometown, textile was a very, very important field. So if you want to know more about people in my hometown, about life in my hometown, you cannot miss records that are related to textile. So they have archives from textile factories. The thing is that there is so much that you have to make a choice. And not only those other collections, but also government records. Not everything can be stored in archives. So they are, let's say for the last 20 years, they have developed a policy and they say, we want to focus mainly on this or mainly on that. And we will collect as much as we can with regards to that specific topic or field. So in Tilburg, they want to know all about textile, for example. A different place may say we want to know and focus more on sports or whatever was important for that area.
And that we also do that here. Our archives, they have written guidelines that they institute and what they'll accept, what they'll keep, things like that.
And it also means that they throw away things.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Laura, you had a question and then Mary had one.
Yes. So, first question, though, with the population schedule that you were showing us, those are available to people online?
Yes.
That's cool.
There are 2 ways to find these records. First of all, many of the archives in the Netherlands on all 3 levels have digitized their most used collections.
Oh, that's
so
great.
Let's say civil registration, you will find everything online. The same with population registers. Many of them are online. Now, and we also have a large collection at Family Search. So if you do not find an archive that has digitized their own records, you might find them through Family Search. So for example, a lot of those population registers have been filmed way back by Family Search and are now digitized by Family Search and are available online as well. So research in the 19th century using civil registration, using population registers, that's what you can do online in most cases. If you go back, so beyond the magic line of 1811, when we don't have civil registration anymore, you will use church books, parish registers, or whatever you want to call them. And most of those are also online, either by the archives here or by Family Search. So you can, the basic research, as I said, the backbone, find on the internet very easy.
Okay, so that leads me to my next question.
So jealous.
I know. It just keeps getting worse and worse, right?
What is your advice to Americans on when they have this ancestor and they know there's some kind of Dutch connection? How do they go back to the location in the Netherlands to start that research? What is your best advice for people in that situation?
One thing that you have to understand is that we don't have a central index or something like that. So for example, in England, you have the GRO, and that's just a national index with all the births, marriages, and death certificates. We don't have that in the Netherlands. So if you want to find a record, you need to know where that person was born or where he or she married or died. So that's complicated. On the other hand, we have so many databases nowadays, also on a national level, that you can just type in the name, and if you're lucky, you find the right place. Now, if you're not lucky like that, you have to do your work on your side of the pond. You have to go through all the records you can find over there to see if you can find something better than Holland. Yeah. Because in many census records, of course, you will see birthplace Holland or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to help. That's not going to help you. Of course, you might find. We all know that working with the fan principle might help you a lot. If you know that we already talked about these communities, for example, in Michigan. If you know that in a specific town or people were from a part in the Netherlands and they all came over to the same area, then you might, well, it might still be a guess, of course, but it's quite an educated guess by then that you have to look in the same area in the Netherlands as where the others came from. So do your research on your site. Find as many details about places in the Netherlands as you can. And sometimes it's difficult. I mean, if you only have one census record and it says Holland, then that's what you have to deal with, of course. But as I said, we have those databases, and you can just type in your name and see what comes up. And one of the things that I do want to share with you as well, so I think I will share my screen again, is a very interesting tool. Is it there?
Yes.
So we have a database of surnames in the Netherlands, and it even has an English interface, so it's easy to use for you as well. What you can do is over here, you can just type in a family name. So let's say I type in my own family name, and you say search, and what you get is you get an idea where in the Netherlands most people with my surname lived. Now, this is the situation in 2007. So you see that the darkest areas are in the south. Well, this is my hometown over here. So you see that the majority of the people with my family name lived in the south, but also in the west, but hardly any in the north. So if you type in that specific name that you're looking for, this map will already give you a clue in what area that family name was used most. That's already one thing. Now, this is the situation in 2007, but they also have a situation in 1947. It's based on what you would call censuses, population counts. So you see that here, 669 people in 1947 in the south, in this province, were using that surname. So this gives you an idea. Don't go to Friesland with that name because there was only one. Don't go to Groningen because there were only 9. But look in North Brabant because there were 669. So this is a very interesting tool to see where that family name in 1947 or 2007 was frequently used. Another thing that I can show you is one of the most used databases in the Netherlands is WieWasWie, which translates to who was who. So for example, if you, I don't know, who has Dutch ancestors? Who can give me a name? Laura?
Cronkite?
How do you spell that?
Well, it depends on which record you're looking at. A lot of times it started with a K.
K.
K-R-A-N-K-H-Y-T-E.
H-Y-T-E,
Y-T-E.
like that?
Yes.
Well, that's not Dutch.
You can say, you can do mine. It's Quackenbush, and I know they're there.
Oh yeah, but what I just want to say is that this last part is what you would write in English, and it sounds, and I'm gonna spell it here like this.
Yes, probably.
H-E-I-D. Now I have no idea if that name will show up.
Let's
it
see.
does.
Oh.
Only 13 times, but it's just an idea. and you see that they are all these records are related to New Amsterdam.
New Amsterdam.
Right.
Comes right into New York. Yeah.
So you have here all kinds of baptisms in the, let's say, 1740s and 1750s in New Amsterdam from the Krankheid family.
Okay.
So if you don't know where your family came from, then just type in this name.
That's a great tool.
And see what comes up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Mary, I don't want you to get, I want your question to get in here before we end up having to end this discussion today.
He did. Laura and I were on the same page and asking the same question, but now I have a different one. So Catholic records in the Netherlands. I mean, what percentage of the Netherlands is Catholic versus Protestant?
Let me show you a map of the Netherlands.
And John, I'm going to have you send me all these links so I can put them in the show notes for people watching later. Okay.
Yes. Oh.
And while you're getting there, I just had a second question.
Yes.
Maybe. So, Catholic baptism records, for instance, sometimes when someone gets married, then they will need to write back to get their baptism record, and so then it gets entered into the register. Does that happen a lot in the Netherlands, and is that a useful way to go about figuring out what the maiden name of that woman in America was?
Well, let me first answer the first question. Okay. You see the map of the Netherlands here?
Yes.
More or less. So here is the border with Belgium. Here is the border with Germany. And this is sea, and on the other side of the sea we have England.
Okay.
You see that we have here a few big rivers. Can you see where I'm pointing?
Yes.
Okay, so here are the big rivers, as we call them. Now I'm gonna be very black and white. Everything south of the rivers is Catholic. Everything north of the rivers is Protestant.
All right then.
and you can understand that these rivers were like a natural border between the parts in the Netherlands.
Sure.
What I'm saying is completely black and white because, of course, it doesn't work like that. But it's just an idea.
Yeah.
Down in my province and in Limburg, majority of the people, a vast majority of the people were Catholic. The more you go up, the less you will find Catholic people. In the West, you have half-half maybe. In the North, the majority is not Catholic anymore. Where do you find Catholics? Well, like this. Then the other question, if you're using records in the Netherlands, we tend to use government records more in the 19th and 20th century than church records. And we start to use church records before the introduction of civil registration. So before 1811, that's when we use church books a lot. So then we really have to use Catholic registers. And if we use them we can use them in the 19th century as well, but then it's more like an addition to what we find in civil records. So, for example, I just told you my story about one of the ancestors who was born from a Protestant mother and a Catholic father.
Right, and that was where?
And oh, that was here. Zoom. Wilp. I even have to go a little bit further.
I see it.
This area was where she came from. And over here, Forst. Forst is where her parents lived, a very Protestant place. And she went to Zutphen, which is a bigger town, small city over here. And then when she moved to the south, I'm gonna zoom out more. So we were here. She moved all the way here.
Okay.
To Loon op Zand. Now, back to your question, Mary. If people were baptized and they got married later on, then what used to be is that you need a certificate from your baptism to hand over to the priest who's gonna marry you. He will use that information for recording the marriage in his marriage register. And if everything was done correctly, he should send notice to the other parish to say, this person who was baptized in your parish is married in mine, and here are the details, so you can record those details in your baptismal register as well. That's how the proper way is and was. You know how things work. So if you want to know maiden names, you don't specifically need to look in Catholic registers because they are also already in civil registers. And even before the introduction of civil registration, almost all the records you will find, parish registers or whatever, will mention maiden names as well. Unless you go back in time. So, for example, the oldest Catholic baptismal registers, for example, will probably say, today I baptized John, who is the son of John. Full stop. There is no name of a mother, not even a first name. So then it becomes complicated. But when you are dealing with more recent records, it will say, I baptized John, the son of John, with a surname, and naming also the mother with first name and maiden name.
Okay.
Wow, this has been really good.
I know, right?
I am really jealous. I don't have, as far as I know, anybody from the Netherlands. My husband
we can get adopted.
Yeah, maybe we can, because I'm telling you, in South Carolina, these vital records didn't start till 1915. So,
Oh, wow, full century.
Yeah. So this just amazes me. I think it's just wonderful. Did anybody have any last minute things they want to say? This has been fabulous, and like I said, I will put any links or things that we've talked about on the show notes, so that people can go back and find those and do some of their own, and we'll put your information too, John, so they can contact you if they have some questions or need your research help. Yeah. So we will do that. Anybody else have any last minute questions or last minute things that they'd like to say other than thank you so much?
Sleep well.
Yes, we need to let him go to sleep. Absolutely.
It was a pleasure to be here and to talk with you all about research in the Netherlands. It was very, very nice to see you again. Some of you I've seen last in March, I think, when we were at Rootstack.
At Rootstack, yes.
Some I see online now and then. So it was wonderful to see you all. And whenever you need something about research in the Netherlands, please be my guest.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And with that, we'll see you next time on GenFriends. Bye, everybody.